Hi, I'm Laura,
I am Deanne.
I'm Philippe. Hello.
and welcome to our Lymond book club. We are reading The Game of Kings by Dorothy Dunnett. We're doing one chapter this time because we're in the end game. There's only 4 chapters left. So we're doing the end game, which is part 4, chapter 1. And since we're in the end game and lots of stuff is happening, we thought it would be fun to kick off with our initial reactions overall to the chapter. And then Philippe is going to lead us through the discussion on this one.
Yes.
One of you give you a reaction because I've read it before.
So this is a fun chapter. Like, a lot of stuff happened, and the women come off looking really good, which I liked. That was really fun. It was just like, oh, good scene with Christian, good scene with Sybilla, good scene with Kate, who I really like. And Gideon Somerville's lovely. I adore him. What are some other initial reactions? Oh, Will Scott. I just want to tisk and like shake my
Will.
head and
Not
just,
poor
like,
Will. Just, he's a confused young boy, isn't he?
He is. The boy has issues,
Yeah.
and he's not dealing with them very well.
Well, there can be an argument made that if Lymond was clearer about certain things, that maybe Will wouldn't have put him in that certain position.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
But yeah, Will. And then, yeah, I'm really looking forward to seeing what happens next.
How about you, Philippe? What was your reaction?
I really enjoyed this chapter. I think most of what happens is really just out in the open and very clear narratively, whereas in the past there's been a couple chapters that I just have no clue what's going on. There's a bit towards the end where Gideon and Lyman sort of have a discussion about politics and about what's going on with England and France and Scotland, which that went a little bit over my head. That was the one part of this chapter where I sort of phased out a little bit, but I'm sure it's all terribly important.
The French showed up. I knew they would.
Yeah. But yeah, and a lot happens. Like this chapter is stuffed. It's packed with just small encounters and bigger encounters, and we have what I believe to be the first death. Unfortunately, I'm really worried that there's more coming. And yeah.
Why do you worry that there's more coming?
Because it's the end of a book and it's historical fiction. So some of these real historical characters died at real historical times. And if we're getting up to them, they're going to have to explain what happened. So
I'll also give my remembering back to the first time I read it, and then also the way I think of it now, my reaction. First of all, we get confirmation in this chapter that Lyman is a good guy, which we kind of figured out by this point. But if you don't get it by now, you're probably not reading closely. And we also have, I think, 2 of my favorite quotes from the entire series in this chapter, which we'll get to. I guess we'll get to them when we get to those sections, but I'll make sure to quote them if you guys don't. But I definitely think that the end game is where we get into, it's much easier to read, lots of action, lots of tension building, and oh my God, what's going to happen next?
yeah, it was really hard for me not to keep reading after this to the next chapter.
Yeah. And there was only a tiny bit where I was like, okay, where is everybody? Like, because that's often my reaction to this, to the writing style isn't so much what's happening. Like, I know what's happening, but I'm often like, where are these people? Like, I get confused about like who's at what spot and who's with them there and where did they come from and where are they going. Like, the physical location of everybody is really confusing to me for some reason. But not in this chapter, except for Harvey. I got a little confused about where Harvey was towards the chapter.
He went to work. He was at work for a day. Lyman missed him.
He got shot at some point.
He got injured, and now he's stuck at Haddington, and he can't travel because he's injured.
Where did he get injured? At Haddington?
Got like a
he's a MacGuffin.
He got shot though. Like, maybe, and now he's dying-ish.
Maybe, yeah.
Maybe, or maybe it's another trap for Lymond. Who knows?
Yeah.
There's so many of them in this chapter. So, well, really just one.
So let's jump in. Philippe, lead us through this discussion.
All right. So the first chapter of Endgame is called Twice Taken, which I assume is talking about the 2 times that Lyman sort of gets taken prisoner. One in a not so favorable way and the other in a much more pleasant way, although he's still technically a prisoner. So we start on June the 2nd. Lyman gets a message that Samuel Harvey is on his way to Castle Wark. So he decides that it is time to set things in motion and he is going to disband his men. He does this by paying them all off. They sort of argue with him and say, no, we don't want to leave you. But he ends up saying that if you want your money, you're going to have to leave. So...
But not only that, but he basically says he's like trained them up and now they should go off and be productive members of society.
Go be good guys. It's like, improve your life. You once were this thing and now you can be this thing that's better for you in society. I love that bit.
It's just a very Lyman thing to do. He can't stop himself from like taking people under his wing and nurturing them and then trying to release them to fly.
I love the line where he says, "You've been mercenaries, go and find something of your own to defend." And that was just like, oh.
And he tries to do that with Will. It doesn't work so well.
They all leave, including Dandy Puff. I think it's very interesting that he has a man named Dandy Puff, because we also have Dandy Hunter, but they are not the same person.
I also really like Jess's Joe. Like, there's a guy named Joe, and he's completely identified by the fact that he belongs to a woman named Jess.
I was reading in that, I told you guys about that book I was reading about the Scottish borders, and it had a section about people's names, and like these were the kinds of names that a lot of people had at the time. Like that was how people actually were referred to by their peers.
Right, and I'm completely curious about whether Jess is Joe's mother or Joe's wife, because either would be logical. Like it's either like Jess's boy Joe or Jess's husband Joe. Either way, it would work. Anyway, sorry.
So all the men disperse except for Will Scott and Turkey Matt, and they do not disperse because they are both owed French gold that somehow and for some reason Will Scott was taking care of. I think maybe they discussed that in an earlier chapter. If they did so, I missed it. But Will Scott has this gold that Turkey Matt and he are going to get paid. Yeah. So the three of them...
I don't remember why he had the gold either.
Yeah.
I think we knew about it before. I think we just here.
It's just something.
One of many tasks that Lyman asked him to do was like, oh, go hide the gold somewhere.
Right.
Oh, yeah. I vaguely remember that.
So Will brings them to the gold, which he has conveniently hidden in the convent that plays in history that we don't quite know about yet. This is the convent where the explosion happened and some nuns were killed, including Lyman's sister. So Lyman doesn't necessarily realize at first that that's where we're going. And when he does realize it, because Will Scott kind of stops in the middle of the path, he's sort of like, oh, geez, you hid the gold there. Great. It's at this point where...
I have to say, there's a little bit of me that felt like Lyman's sort of insightful nature failed him here, because, like, out of all the places in the entire country or area for Will to hide gold, he picked the cruelest spot for Lyman. And I feel like it's not a coincidence. And Lyman, like the fact that he doesn't figure out that something's wrong until they hear the horses, I was like, eh.
So I think that's actually important because, how do I say? One, Lyman is getting increasingly exhausted with this moving around and being stressed out. There was a reference a few chapters ago to him laughing a little bit hysterically, like he was like on the edge. And then also he's about to go to work to get Harvey, so he's super focused on that.
So he's not paying attention.
He's not paying attention to Will. Yeah. I think he even makes a mention of it later at some point, that he was so focused on his goal that he wasn't paying.
Yeah, he did. Yeah.
He does, yeah. So Lyman leaves them. He's not going to go into the convent. So Will takes this time to sort of sneak behind their backs while Lyman and Matt are talking. And he makes some sort of symbol to, I guess, Andrew Hunter's men that are hiding where they can't be seen. And it's at that point that they hear hooves coming. So all three of them head into the convent where they are hiding. They tie up the horses. And while they're in there, they see that Andrew Hunter's men are coming directly for the convent. Lyman recognizes them as Balagan men, and then realizes at this point that this is a trap. So they head into the basement, and while they're going into the basement, he makes Will Scott go first. He takes Will Scott's sword from his sheath and pushes him down the stairs and then calls him out as a traitor.
Not only that, he says, another trick and I'll kill you. He is
Yes.
pissed.
He does threaten him. So the three of them are hiding in the basement. And this is just another trap that Will Scott has sort of sprung, because Lyman knows that there's a passage underground out of the nunnery that he's planning to use, but when they get there, it's completely blocked with barrels of gunpowder. And who's holding the torch but Will Scott? So he sort of tells them that he is ready to kill himself and all three of them in about 10 minutes' time. And in order to not have this outcome, Turkey, Matt, and Lyman are going to have to give themselves up and go upstairs and prostrate themselves in front of Andrew Hunter, who is the one that has sort of sprung this trap.
Question for you guys. Did it surprise you that Will was ready to kill himself with them?
Well, I thought I kind of went with what Lyman said, which is Lyman was talking about, like, you're dealing with hysteria and not guts or lack of them. And then a bit later he says, like, why the melodrama? I don't know. You know, and it's just like, I took it as like a teenager just saying, like, I'm going to kill myself if blah, blah, blah. You know, just that, like, the hyperbole of passion where it's like,
Mm-hmm.
you can never escape and I'm going to kill myself to prevent you from escaping. And
Do you think he wasn't actually going to?
no, I think he was.
I actually thought he was bluffing until the moment that he throws the torch. And I was a little surprised at that. I was like, oh, he's actually going to do it.
I like this as an illustration of a character trait that she's built up really well. He's super hot-headed, super juvenile. He's super kind of threatened by Lyman and thinks he's in this competition with Lyman that Lyman is not even playing and doesn't care about. And like all of the, like she set these little, you know, character things from the very beginning. And I feel like they just kind of explode here with like a crazy thing. I'm going to kill all of us, including myself. That is completely in character with actually what we've known from him and how he would be in a very high emotional situation like this one.
Well, there's a point where he says, I think it's when he stabs him, where he says something about, I'm going to get a reaction out of you. And so I can't, where is it? I thought I underlined it. Maybe I didn't. Where he basically said something like, I'm finally going to get a response from Lyman or something. Like he was so desperate for Lyman to react to him, and Lyman kept blowing him off and treating him like a kid. And so he's like, you know, damn you, you're gonna pay attention to me even if we both die.
Mm-hmm.
And yikes.
It actually, I'm looking for the line you're referring to, but it's actually several times throughout the chapter that Will is looking at Lyman thinking, he must be feeling something now. He must be having a reaction now. And it's like, dude, of course he's having a reaction.
Right.
All of his plans, and you're probably going to get him killed.
Yeah.
But Will doesn't, he's like got this obsession with Lyman. He desperately wants Lyman to look at him and pay attention to him and react to him. But also he's like, part of him doesn't understand that Lyman is a human being. He still thinks he's this machine or this omnipotent, you know, creature.
Yeah.
So they're definitely at a stalemate in the basement. Towards the end of it, Lyman says he's going to give Will back his sword, or Will asks for his sword back. Lyman does this really swift move where, to distract him, he throws his sword in one direction. Will takes that as his chance to throw the torch on the gunpowder. But I guess at the same time Lyman threw the sword, he also threw his cape in the other direction, and it intercepts the torch and snuffs it out, so nothing goes boom. And then Will and Lyman sort of grapple with each other in a scene very close to an earlier chapter where Lymond and Andrew Hunter were wrestling. And again, Will's sort of pinning Lymond, and Lymond uses the same sort of move. It's at this point where Will, his right hand is free, he reaches for a dagger he has hidden under his shirt, and he stabs Lymond and thinks he's really injured him a lot. And
it's just so difficult. He's like, he thinks he's dealt this mortal blow. Turns out he just stabbed him in the shoulder.
But even so, like, he also was like, damn, it didn't affect him at all. But actually it did affect him. It does probably hurt a lot and really is not healthy to get stabbed in the shoulder.
No, it's not.
But Lyman is so good at playing it cool and not letting anyone see that Will's like, man, it didn't do anything.
Yeah. But I mean, that's his response. I'm like, I thought I stabbed him, damn it, you know. Oh.
And he does. He thinks he's mortally injured him, but he only hit his shoulder. So, but Lyman has a wound, which is important to the rest of this chapter because it sort of.
I mean, in 1547, it's not a good idea. 48, it's not a good idea to get stabbed in the shoulder. It's not a good idea to get stabbed anywhere.
No. And it really sort of, it's the thing that sort of helps Kate Somerville come to terms with him being their prisoner later on.
Okay.
It brings out her maternal instinct, which I really like that part, by the way. Yeah. But we'll get there.
It's the same thing, too, for Gideon. When Gideon sees how vulnerable he is, he's like, oh, you go to bed.
Yeah, it's like, go to sleep.
So before we leave that little section, I really love the way it ends. This isn't one of my two favorite quotes, but I'll just read this little bit. As they're leaving the convent, behind them, dwindling into a green silence, lay the convent, denying its fractured bones to a tranquil grave, ravished and inviolate, wearing the nimbus of its injuries like a coronal.
It's just such drastic contrast in that description, which is fascinating. I find it interesting that the next few words are one of the few times that the author refers to him as Francis Crawford, but neither Francis Crawford nor the boy. And so I find it interesting every time he gets referred to as Francis.
Why do you think she chose that moment to refer to him by his real name?
I think there's something like Lyman is sort of a facade of his that he wears, kind of, and Francis Crawford is maybe a core part of him. So yeah. He's been stripped away a bit, like the Lyman part has been stripped away at this point. Probably more because of the convent visit and maybe the betrayal of Will, but yeah.
I agree, and I think it's also because it's Francis Crawford who needed to get to work to save his life, who now can't be saved. And I think it's telling us that this betrayal and this fact that he can't get to Harvey is hurting him in his deepest, real human place.
Yeah. Yeah. The boy, Will Scott.
She makes it very clear, the writer and the narrator.
Does Will Scott ever grow up in this series?
That would be a spoiler, Dee.
I know.
Spoilers.
I hope he does. I hope we get to see Will, like, turn into...
I think he grows up a little bit in this chapter. There's all these references.
Yeah, I agree. He does.
He's like, wisdom, I forgot the word. But.
He's learning things that he should have figured out before, but
getting there.
So Andrew Hunter now has them in custody, and he's going to bring them to Threave, which is John Maxwell's castle. And they talk a little bit, Andrew Hunter and Lymond. I love how Lymond asks him, and how is Marietta? Lady Coulter is alive, no thanks to your monstrous efforts, sort of showing that there's some planning and plotting going on there. And it's during this discussion that Turkey Matt makes a run for it. And unfortunately, Andrew Hunter signals his men to shoot some arrows into the air, and they do, in fact, hit Turkey Matt. And Turkey Matt ends up dying, which is sad because, like I said earlier, I think it's our first character death in the series. I'm sure there's many more to come, but...
What did you make of, did it surprise you that he died? And what did you make of Lyman's and Will's reactions?
It's definitely tragic. It didn't need to happen. Lyman's not really paying attention because he's talking to Andrew Hunter and Will at the same time, and that's when he shouts, "My God, no, you fool," because I think he knows what's going to happen. So, and Will Scott is also very apologetic. He did not mean for anyone to die for this. This was just a way to capture them. So it's kind of sad because I think Lyman realizes if he had just paid more attention to Will Scott and what he was doing, this didn't need to be the outcome. And Will Scott may also regret that he went to this length to sort of get Lyman captured.
Yeah. Yeah, and then, although to be completely honest, I was not surprised at all. Not from a narrative perspective from within the story, but from outside the story. Like, we just haven't had a meaningful death up to this point, and at this point in the story, it just makes the stakes higher. Like, we know that the author is willing to kill a character that we find sympathetic and that we like, and so going into the end game of the story, this sets up tension a lot more narratively. And so I was unsurprised that in fact, as soon as I saw that Matt was with them at the trap, I knew he was going to die before the end of the trap, just because it makes the end of the book more scary for the reader that can happen. So I was not surprised, but I was sad. I liked Matt.
I liked it as an illustration of, like, Will doesn't understand the stakes. He's behaving like a child. He's like a kid having an argument with another kid. And he's got to realize at this point that this is not a game. You know, people are going to die. Yeah. And also, I love Lyman's reaction to it because it tells you so much about him, which is he's not even going to try to take this as an opportunity to escape. And you see also Will helps him off his horse and lets him get to Turkey. Like, even Will knows how much this hurts him. And the way that, you know, Turkey like complains about Will and Lyman says, no, it was my fault. And just tries to like be there with his friend and comfort him in his last moments is, you know, it tells us a lot about Lyman.
Yeah. And Matt's just like, you can have my gold. And he's like, you know, if you get a chance, my bit's yours, you know, and the croft is like his home. He's like, it's a nice place, although it's kind of cold in winter. Yeah. And then he dies.
I was gonna say, I think I knew he was gonna die the whole time because he has that early on. He has a line about like, one day I want to retire to a croft or something, and it's like the, you know, it's like the
you're not gonna
story of like the cop who's gonna retire and he gets shot the day before.
Yeah,
it's definitely
I mean, this was literally like the day before retirement because they had disbanded, and like Matt was gonna pick up his gold and go to his, you know.
One thing I will say about Dorothy Dunnett is she is not afraid of tropes. She will leap right in and do the trope, but she doesn't just do the trope. She does it 150%. She goes all in. She is like the tropiest, you know, deepest into that trope ever. And she writes so well that you're just like, okay, I'll go with you.
Okay.
Great.
Well, I mean, tropes are tropes because they work. And like the reason they get a bad rap is because people are often lazy and write them in a really lazy, bad way. But a good trope is just a classic piece of story that we've seen, you know? And so, yeah, take the classics. Exactly. I love a good trope.
I will also say, before we leave this and go to the next part, that last week I sort of thought that Lymond and Andrew Hunter were working together in some way. No, I do not believe that at all anymore. I have another little theory about Andrew Hunter, but they don't really talk about him much for the rest of this chapter, so I'll get into that after we finish the chapter.
There was a line when Lyman first talks to Dandy, and he says something about, other than apologizing for not being Asmodeus, what can I do? And Dandy's face goes from red to white when he says that. If you look up that reference, it'll give you a hint.
Okay. Yeah, I didn't want to look it up because I thought maybe it would be, well, I don't know. But I will look it up.
Yeah. I recognize the name as a demon from a different story. So
yeah, it does sound like a demonic name.
Yeah.
Asmodean. All right, so if we're moving on, the retinue continues on to Threave, which is John Maxwell's castle.
I got pictures of Threave here. I can show you.
Oh, cool.
And John Maxwell is not.
And Agnes's.
And Agnes, yeah.
She's another one who turns out great in this chapter.
Yeah, I have. Well, we'll get to it when we get to her. But.
I have feelings about Agnes.
Mm-hmm.
So this is Threave. And then also, this is Threave. This is on the Now You Have Done It blog. She found a good, kind of more intimidating looking Threave, since it's apparently a scary place. Violence was the odor of Threave.
Is there really a blog called Now You Have Done It?
Yeah, it's great. It's a Game of Kings chapter by chapter analysis. It's really good.
Oh my God, that's awesome.
I wish you could do it for the other books.
Oh, and also it's fun to notice, just as a fun little thing, that the Threave is on the River Dee. So
I know.
There we go.
The Dark River.
So they get to Threave. Andrew Hunter sort of ties Lymond up in the middle of the courtyard.
Oh, I have something actually. Okay, sure. Comment. Because Dee, you were talking about how Lyman, or how Will through the shadows is trying to get a reaction on Lyman. Oh, he finally reacted. On 341, there's this line as they go into town, and Lyman is pale, and everyone's jeering at him, and he's getting manhandled. And Will is watching this, terrible tragedy and humiliation that's happening to Lyman, and he's like, his emotions for once must be a little irregular. Have I touched the pulse? Or will this sudden exposure do it for me?
Yeah, that's the line I underlined. It's like, have I touched his pulse? And it's just like, dude, that's why you did all this, because you just want a reaction from Lyman.
To me.
Well.
Sorry, keep going, Philippe.
All right. So the crowd is sort of, I don't know exactly what happens, but they're sort of yelling slurs and insults at him, and he's returning them, and it gets really ribald, and it sort of has a quality of fun about it up till a certain point, until Lyman suddenly starts being silent, and that's when he's
playing with the crowd and getting them on his side, which he's really good at, and then all of a sudden he stops.
Yeah, actually, at the very beginning of the story, he was a prisoner, and he got his guards on his side very quickly. He knew exactly how to do it. So I think, Dee, you're right. That's what he's doing. He's actually already getting the crowd on his side.
He's manipulating the whole space into being on his side to gain something. Like, I'm sure he's got a goal. We don't know what it is. But then all of a sudden he switches tactics.
And he switches tactics because Christian Shepherd shows up. He sees her across the courtyard. Jeez, why do I keep getting it wrong? Christian Stewart, not Shepherd, not Shaw. All right, Christian.
Okay, I keep saying Henry Douglas instead of George Douglas.
So Christian Stewart shows up, and they both recognize her, and she sort of comes across the courtyard and starts talking to him and sort of pleading with the crowd and saying, like, oh, what has this man done wrong? She says a really interesting line. I just have to find it. I didn't underline it.
They start torturing him before she does that, though.
Yeah.
Which I think is kind of...
Yes, I have here, if you're interested in
there we go.
medieval torture. It's the pain at door. Normally done, I guess, lying down, but they somehow managed to do it to Lyman standing up, tied to a pillar.
It's the way Giles Corey was pressed to death in the Salem witch trials.
Oh, there we go.
Yeah. Yeah, that was right in there in the Wikipedia. It said Giles Corey said. Yeah, it's because if you raise someone's, I want to explain it, but if you put someone's arms above their head and put a bunch of weight on you, then your diaphragm can't lift. And what happens with this particular kind of torture is it basically puts too much weight on your diaphragm and you can no longer breathe. Like it's a way of suffocating someone.
Not good.
Pleasant.
Yeah, it's often how people who are crucified die,
Mm-hmm.
like because they're stretched out like this, and then they get to the point, they get so tired that they can't lift their body up on their feet that have usually been tortured somehow, and so then if they can't press up from their feet, they can't breathe, and then they suffocate.
So
It's like the most horrible form of torture.
We can see why Christian Stewart is not having it.
Yeah. Like it reads in the book kind of tame, but it's actually really horrible.
Well, and we see Lyman's reaction. He actually faints, which is, you know, not what we'd expect from our, you know, unstoppable superhuman hero.
Yeah.
So when Christian crosses the courtyard to sort of speak to him, she tells Will Scott, of course I know it's him. She does say to Lymond, I've known your voice since I was 12.
She knew all along.
I love that Dee guessed this from the very beginning.
I knew she knew all along.
Oh, yeah. Definitely. She knew.
I think, yeah, it was just the way she was written. Like, she was too smart.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but you caught something I had never noticed before, which is in the very beginning, there's a reference to her actually knowing someone by their voice. Mm-hmm. And so then it comes back here. This was actually like foreshadowed from the beginning.
Yeah.
Well, I told you sound was my stock in trade. So she has known this whole time.
Yeah. And she can hear from far away. Like, her ears can pick up more than a sighted person.
Yeah.
Which is cool.
Right. So unfortunately, the crowd is sort of lumping her in with Lymond now because she says that she knows him and they can hear her. So the crowd is getting sort of agitated with her. Buccleuch, Sim, who is sort of one of her servants or her I don't know.
Her main servant.
Her manservant. He's telling Buccleuch, who's also there, by the way, Scott, to get her out of here. And she's saying, I don't care if there are 2,000. I'm not accustomed to denying my friends in public. So Lyman sort of does it for her, and he denounces her in front of the crowd, saying how he despises redheads.
I understand there's like a superstition about redheads, but I'm like, that was kind of tame to be like this. It's supposed to be like this horrible insult that would like turn her away from him and like make her safe. And what he's saying is he doesn't like redheads.
Which... he doesn't really want to hurt her. He just wants the crowd to not associate her with him because he's trying to protect her. So
well, I think he wants her to give up and stop protecting him. Like shut up. And
yeah, I think he knows she's not going to shut up. I think he's more trying to get the crowd to be like, oh, he definitely wasn't with her because he hates redheads.
Yeah.
In fact,
so
I will not have my name coupled with a red-headed woman. Red-ribboned mare's kick, red-horned cattle gore, Rowan's poison, and so do redheads given the chance. Is that clear?
Yeah.
Always a word of many, always a man of many words. Most of the time.
Yeah. He certainly got the crowd completely against him now.
Mm-hmm.
Poor Christian.
Poor Christian.
But also I love that she doesn't look angry at all. She doesn't. She knows it's bullshit. She's just
totally knows what he's doing.
She understands completely. Yeah. So they do stop torturing him at that point and put him in the cellar.
And that's when he faints.
That's when he faints, definitely.
And I love the fact that Will Scott thinks it's a fake faint. Yeah. And he's surprised when he checks on him and is like, oh, he actually fainted for real.
Which is another sign that Will Scott has no idea, like, what's happening or how things really work in the world. Like,
there's the quote. There's a quote earlier about initium sapienti. Something like the beginning of wisdom. And something about fear, and Will has the fear but not the wisdom. But then Lyman brings the quote back later about like the beginning of wisdom when they're talking in the cellar.
So at this point, Lyman is in the cellar. Watt Scott is interrogating Will and asking him for the names of Lyman's other men, and Will will not give any of them up. So Watt Scott throws Will into the cellar with Lyman for the evening.
By the way, speaking of tropes, I just love this so much because it's really ridiculous. It's really like, how would they end up in the cellar together? But she's like, no, you want the scene between the two of them? I'm going to give it to you.
This is basically like, we're going to a hotel and there's only one bed. Like, that's what this is. Like, we're going to throw them in the cell together? Like, really?
That's what happens. Yep.
Yeah.
Oh, and can I just say how much I love the first line of this section? There's nothing very jolly about being locked in a cellar with a man whom, in every possible sense, you have just stabbed in the back.
You have.
Absolutely. So they're in the cellar together, and they get to talking. Lyman.
Also, by the way, they totally cleaned up Lyman and made him pretty. Like,
I know. No, he keeps himself up somehow, despite his, his clothes being messed up and being all dirty. Somehow he managed to be at the place where he's neat and impeccably neat.
All that was unsightly had been removed from Lyman's appearance.
Which is a Lyman, by the way, is such a neat freak. We get these little like snippets of it, but this is a character trait here. But I wanted to highlight, kind of speaking of this, this is the first time we get this line, 347 at the bottom, about how Will, couldn't find any signs of weakness or humiliation. It says, with the face of a Della Robbia angel, Lyman spoke. So apparently, for years after this, fans would send Dorothy Dunnett postcards of Della Robbia angels. And fans are always, wait, what does a Della Robbia angel look like? So in case you were wondering, I pulled a few.
Hello, Mr. Crawford.
Here's another one.
Okay.
Another few. These are from the Dorothy Dunnett Society Instagram. And here's another one.
Okay.
You can get an idea. Okay, keep going.
So they start talking in the cellar, sort of hurling insults back and forth at each other. If there was a winner to this conversation, it's definitely Lyman, because he's sort of throwing all the right things.
There's another reference, though, about Will on the middle of the page where he says, I used a knife on you badly, my God, how ineptly, but at least I made you wince in some sort once, however briefly.
Oh my God. Okay, let me also, another one I just loved, 348. You pathetic maladroit nincompoop, you're never right, but this time you can squat in your misconceptions like duck's meat in a ditch and let them choke you.
Yeah.
Lyman did not expect to get betrayed, which shows us that he's maybe not quite the master manipulator we assumed he has been for the entirety of the book so far.
At least not when he's completely exhausted.
Right. During their discussion, Will brings up 4 women that he feels that Lyman has personally done harm to. Let's see, where did I list them? So, okay, I didn't list them. But it is Lyman's sister, who died in the convent. It is Christian Stewart. I said it right this time. Marguerite Douglas is the third. And then the fourth is... Marietta, yes, because of the whole jewelry thing and stuff. So,
and causing her miscarriage, even though he wasn't actually there.
Even though he didn't.
Her.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I love that he uses this as an opportunity to get Will to swear to protect Christian and like save her reputation.
Yeah.
Like her reputation got ruined by one of us today. Okay, and actually also, here's something I loved also is while Lyman is being tortured and he's being silent and Christian's up in the window and he sees her and Will is watching him and he sees Lyman's eyelids like flicking up, his eyelashes like flicking, like kind of trying to get Will to see her. And then when she comes down and she starts going off and then Lyman looks at Will and just like looks at him like super intensely, like,
right,
like fix this, protect her. And like the whole time, even though Will is the one that betrayed Lyman, Lyman is looking at him like, protect her, protect her, protect her.
Yeah. and Will is just clueless. Yeah. Again, I think you're right. It's that he just has no concept of consequences for anything. Mm-hmm. And
unlike
he's not thinking about consequences.
Yeah, he's never had to face real consequences.
Yeah.
There's something Lyman calls him coddled or something. Like he's basically the heir of one of the richest families in Scotland. He's a spoiled rich kid who's never had to live in the real world. He went off to school, he learned about moral philosophy, he decided he was going to be an outlaw, but he does not understand in any real visceral way the stakes of what he's doing.
Yeah.
So Lyman eventually guesses that he's been thrown in jail. Will's been thrown in jail because he wouldn't name names. Is this by any chance a modest silence? Good God, Lyman sat down. Have you been protecting your former colleagues? I had no quarrel with them. Continuing to stare at him, the master gave a hoot of derisive laughter and sat back nursing his injured arm. My only success, and I was too damned preoccupied to watch it coming to the boil. So he sort of offers Will a way out, something to do with letters. I didn't quite understand this part, but I guess he has letters that he's written that will exonerate him.
This is what I think it was. Did Lyman have Will write the letters that were like informing the Scots government of their spying, and Will wrote a set to the Scots and a set to the English, and Lyman tore up the set that went to the English, but Will didn't know that. So it looks to the Scots as if Will has been feeding them information, even though it's really been happening as Lyman has been feeding them information. And exactly. Will thought they were going both directions. Is that what happened?
So Lyman set it up the whole time so that Will has a way out. He has an exoneration. So if Lyman gets caught and convicted, Will has two things. He's got the letters he sent to the Scottish government that looked like he was helping them the whole time. And he's got the fact that he attacked the English at Hume. Lyman is the one that revealed Will's name there. So between those two things, Will be fine.
Yeah.
Oh, also, I just want to highlight, because we just moved on from this section before we do, end of 350, right after Lyman realizes that the reason Will is locked in prison with him is because Will was protecting the men and realizes that was his success. He sits down and it says, mysteriously, the chill of animal danger had gone. There was an unwilling amusement about his mouth. And I just love this. Like, he was so angry. He was angry about Turkey Nat. He was so angry that Will got his friend killed. And then when he realizes that Will actually is protecting the other men, he just like sits back and is like, oh,
good job.
Growing pains, he'll be fine. Yeah. I finally helped him grow up. It's super sweet.
Like, oh, he learned something. Yeah.
So Lyman is now looking at Will to sort of help Christian Stewart get out of the predicament that she was in for sort of claiming in front of everybody that she's known Lyman and has been in contact with him recently.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I love the end of this where they're just kind of going back and forth about like Christian and the letters and all of that. And Will says like, but you tore them up. Why? And finally Lyman is just, here it is. He's like, because I'm on your side, you damn fool. And just like, you idiot, you haven't figured this out yet. And then it just says, the cellar was very quiet. The master's face closed, offered nothing to Scott's strained scrutiny. After a moment, the boy collected his own limbs and stretched back slowly on the bed. And then he's kind of like trying to push back a little bit. He's like, that would be your story in Edinburgh, of course, he said eventually. Can you prove it? And he knows. It's just.
And I love that. I mean, I think as a reader, you've started obviously to figure it out. And by this point, you probably have figured it out. And so you at this point, even if early on you were with Will, like, wow, this guy's a jerk. Now you're like, come on, Will, catch up.
Yeah.
And you're kind of proud when he finally starts to. Yeah. And also I love the quote right after that, because we talked before about that wonderful quote about the stars. And this is on 352. He says, look at the stars. I offered them to you once before on a celebrated occasion. Forth quenching go the stars one by one, and now is left but Lucifer alone. And what can Lucifer do with a bolt and a bar and over 100 horseless miles between him and his illusions? And it goes on, and it's beautiful, and I love it. And then at the very end, he talks about, Will, you're a damned nuisance and a public danger, but so is your father. It's a thrownness in the vitals of the body politic, which will either kill it or save it. So he's got this, this is the great family of Scotland, and I want to nurture it to help the country, because you being great could help save Scotland.
Mm.
Yeah. I love the next line so much. To me, like, this was so, I mean, the first line of this next section where it's like, Will Scott had been right in thinking that the master of Maxwell would not move an inch to help a man of the notoriety of Lyman. And it's like, that's true. The master of Maxwell does not move an inch to help. And it's just like, I love the way that there's this completely true statement that also is flipped with the opposite happening, because it's the mistress of Maxwell that comes and helps.
Yes.
Yeah.
So Maxwell sends Agnes to the house in order to be the perfect hostess, because there's people staying over at the castle.
Yeah.
The first thing she does is sort of yell at Scott. She's like, what do you mean Will Scott is in the prison with him? Get him out immediately.
Yeah. And she's what, 14? I love that she's just yelling at these men, like, get that boy out of the cellar. Like,
there's no one except for Agnes Harris probably that could have done this. She's got no fear.
It's almost like she's like, this is my house, and get that man out of the cellar.
So when she does free Will Scott, he's very tired. She sees him to bed right away. And of course, Will Scott forgets to bolt the trap door behind him.
But I think it's more than that. I think Agnes manipulates him into not doing it. So like she's like pushing him away from the door. I mean, I could totally see, like, she's standing in front of the trap door and just like, go to bed. You know?
It's absolutely Agnes.
Yeah.
Who rescues Lyman in this part. She's the reason he escapes.
Absolutely.
And I love how she says in the next bit that, do you not remember? I have 3 men that heard me tell you to bolt that trap door, and yet you did not.
Right.
And I was like,
because none of the 3 guys there were a Scott.
But I also love that Will, even though he is the one that betrayed Lyman, he knew what was happening. He thought about stopping it, and then he just decided to let it happen.
Yeah.
He's getting there.
Agnes to the rescue.
I mean, and it does say it was a long time before he fell asleep. Like, it was 10 minutes until he was in bed, but it was a long time before he fell asleep. So he was sitting there, like, agonizing over stuff, but
he makes a quick decision. It's on 3:53 while it's happening, and he says, all right, said Scott, making up his mind rather to his own surprise. That's him making up his mind
not
to let her basically leave the thing unlocked.
Yeah. I'm half asleep, that's all. I'm sorry, lead on. Yeah.
And then the next morning she blames him, and he's like holding his tongue like, sure, it was my fault.
Yeah.
I'll take the blame on this one.
Yeah.
So then we do a complete location switch. We go to Mid-Coulter, where Sybilla...
Although, just really quickly though, I do like what Agnes does, where she says, like, sleepy you may have been, but not too sleepy to forget that, I hope. Even my 3, does the 3-men stuff. So if the trap wasn't properly fastened, you have only yourself to blame. But that's true. Like, she's not wrong. Like, he does have himself to blame because he let it happen, and he chose to let it happen. So it's kind of like, yeah.
Oh, by the way, before we move on from the cellar, I have fan art of this cellar.
Of course there's fan art of the cellar.
This is by Bella Rolls on Tumblr. And my favorite thing about this, this is the "You pathetic, maladroit, nincompoop" line, which is so wonderful. But my favorite thing about this is the little grumpy red-headed eyebrows Will Scott face in the "Am I not right" word bubble.
I think we should bring back the word nincompoop.
I do like
I don't
it.
use that word often enough.
Such a good word.
Or Mid-Coulter.
So at Mid-Coulter, Sybilla is talking to Marietta about her relationship with Richard and offering her advice and how the 2 of them can communicate with each other. She sort of brings up the fact that one of their big fight happened when Marietta was asking Richard to be more involved in sort of the political nature of what was going on. And she says, look at Janet Buccleuch. Like, she doesn't get any of the information from Watt Scott, but yet most of what Watt Scott does in that household is because of Janet and because of, you know, her special ways of getting him to do what she wants. So she's trying to tell him to sort of, you know, I don't know, be not more manipulative, but like find different ways of communicating with your husband.
Yeah.
Like, because
I love the way that Sybilla, like, Marietta has been telling herself a story about her relationship with Richard and about who Richard is. And she's been like, he's difficult to understand. He's like she's been telling herself this story, and Sybilla just rips it down. She's like, you are being selfish in your interpretation of this story. And so I love, like, where she says, Marietta says, he's not easy to understand. And Sybilla responds with, and yet you rather expected Richard to read your mind, didn't you? You thought he pictured you insisted forever with pots and pans. A woman is a worthy thing. They do the wash and do the ring, and so on. Whereas, of course I did. No other thought crossed his mind. Heaven forbid, said the Dowager crossly, that I should tattle over other folks' heirs. And then she goes on to talk about Watt and Janet. But I love that she's not, like, she's not saying that Richard was perfect, and she's not saying that Marietta was perfect. She's like, you both, like, you're not innocent in this situation. And here, you know, and I like that.
I just love the way she talks about, like, if it's a relationship of equals and you want him to be interested in you, then you need to be interested in him. And it's never said like, oh, you know, he's the man, it's more important that you're interested in him than he's interested in you. It's that if it's going to be equal, then, you know, you need to give, in addition, you need to give what you want to get in order for this to actually be an exchange.
Like, that stuff that he cares about, like, do you know why he cares about that stuff? You know, why are these things important to him? And then she says, there are two things you should, like, one is the most serious thing in his life is his country, and the other is this: the only thing that could kill Richard is a lack of stability. Marietta's face darkened. You mean inconstancy? I mean, said Sybilla gently, the folly of allowing oneself to be attracted always by superficial glitter. I mean a craving for change and excitement, even the nasty excitement of waiting to be found out about those jewels. And so it's just like, like, she had something good, and because she couldn't see that it was good, and she wanted something superficial and glittery, she ruined it.
Or maybe didn't completely ruin it, but she certainly
put it. It's ruined at the moment. Yeah. There's hope that it will be unruined.
I also love that it's a difficult and painful conversation, but it's a loving one. Mm-hmm. And at the end, Marietta says she feels better. Like, she got approached by someone who gave her honesty, tough honesty, but also did it in a caring way that is, you know, productive and going to help her, hopefully, you know, do better.
Yeah, because, you know, Sybilla's goal is for Marietta and Richard to have a good relationship. Like, clearly she wants her daughter-in-law and her son to be copacetic, and she's trying to do that. So
what do you guys make of this line? I love the first bit, but then, you know, Marietta asks, how can I change now? And Sybilla says, time will do it for you, my infant, and much too quickly, which is really lovely. Like, you know, in some degree, Sybilla is recognizing that Marietta's very young and very immature, and she's going to mature, and that maturity is going to come after a lot of suffering. And in a way, you know, it's sad that you know, time is so short and this innocence is so short, but also this innocence is annoying because it's really annoying. But anyway, the next thing she says is, your tragedy was that the man you became involved with was the very person who created the flaw in Richard's maturing. And if that was anyone's fault, it was probably mine. What do you guys make of that?
I mean, she's just referencing the relationship that Richard and Frances have. Richard and Lyman have, and I don't think we know why it's so fraught. Like, it stems from before the death of their sister. Otherwise, Richard would not have been so quick to believe that Lyman would intentionally kill their sister. So it's things from childhood, but I don't think we've learned what those are. So for some reason, Richard is deeply, deeply jealous of Lyman. And Sybilla, like, part of it could be that she showed favoritism toward him. Like, maybe she feels guilty about that.
Okay.
Yeah.
But, right? I mean, do we know more than that?
I'm not gonna say anything. I think it's set up to make you wonder, is actually what I think.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's clear that there's more going on and there's a huge backstory that's probably pretty painful. But I don't think we know what it is yet.
All right, so moving on, this is the point that Christian Stewart shows up with news that Lyman has been captured, and he is at Threave with the Maxwells. And then Christian Stewart says she has a plan to meet with George Douglas at Dalkeith to talk about possibly setting up their own meeting with Samuel Harvey, because she knows that Lymond was after Samuel Harvey, that was the last name on his list. And this is where Marietta and Christian Stewart both sort of confess to helping Lyman out in their own different ways, and the secrets start spilling.
Sybilla, not Marietta.
Oh, Sybilla.
Not Marietta, yeah.
Yeah, you're right. I meant Sybilla. I just said Marietta.
Can I say how much I love Sybilla? Nobody ever credits me with normal thought processes.
Poor Sybilla.
It's like, yeah, I saw everything that was going on. You people are not that subtle.
Yeah.
But
yeah, and I also love how Sybilla and Christian have this whole conversation about everything that's been going on, and then at one point Marietta's like, "You've been helping Lyman?"
Mm-hmm.
Right. And she's also like, "But wait, Bullo, wasn't that the guy who," you know? And everyone's like, "Yeah, catch up."
Oh, yep. He didn't kill my baby? No, Marietta, he did not kill me.
No, you can't blame that on
I
her.
don't understand why she doesn't know that. Like, he wasn't there.
She's just believing the hype at this point.
Yeah, okay. Like, he didn't entice me to Crawford more? Like, no! You ran away, crazy lady. Not that she's crazy, but, you know.
He's so devious and he's so manipulative. He's excommunicated. Maybe he's working with the devil. Maybe he did black magic to get her to, leave Richard. And, well, she's still, he sent the jewels. Maybe this was his plan, whatever. Also, I love that Tom Erskine is here. And Tom is also like, wait, what? You've been helping Lyman? And Christian, one, like, to her credit, she's not afraid of telling him the truth. And then when he starts to get, like, worried, she pulls out, like, you're the one I'm engaged to. And he can't really argue with that.
I love Sybilla. So Tom says, the man's a saint. And Sybilla's answer is like my favorite description of Lyman so far, I think, where she says, no, not a saint, an artist in the vivisection of the soul.
But only because
he's known the knife now for 5 years. Yeah. So
this is one of my 2 quotes that I think are the best quotes in this book, or in this chapter, that are 2 of my favorite quotes ever. I freaking love that line.
Yeah.
That's Lyman in a nutshell.
Vivisection of the soul is just evocative.
An artist in the vivisection of the soul.
It's an evocative phrase.
One of our commenters, who I know, she left a comment that this is prose, but it's almost like poetry. Some lines like that are just so poetic and beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then Sybilla sort of ends this chapter, or this little bit of the chapter, by saying that she hopes Lymond is the person that can reunite Marietta with Richard.
And not only that, but if he's going to break under it, I hope he doesn't break too soon. So even though Will Scott sees, this is a superhuman, he's unstoppable, like, she's like,
his mother knows.
His mother knows that he's not in a good place. Yeah. Why is Lyman the only one that can send Richard back to Marietta?
Well, part of it has to do with Richard thinks that Lymond stole Marietta away. So I think if Lyman can prove that that's not what happened, that'll help. I mean, that's just on a basic level.
I mean, he would believe his brother over his wife.
Would he?
I don't know.
I don't know if he would.
I don't know.
I don't think he would.
I don't think he would either, but it seems like, or Lyman could do something that would fix everything. It seems a little impossible now, but you know, we eat the impossible for breakfast, so who knows? We'll see.
If it was true that Sybilla loves Lyman more than Richard, why is her thought here that but she's not saying, I hope Lyman can be saved. We know she thinks that, but she's really also thinking about Richard, and she thinks Lyman can save Richard. So I feel like this is, if nothing else, evidence that she really loves Richard too.
Mm-hmm.
I think, as a mother, like, it's totally possible that in their family, Richard spent more time with their dad, and I know tons of families where like one of the kids gravitates towards one of the parents and another kid gravitates towards the other parent, and they just kind of grow up that way. And it doesn't mean that either parent loves that particular kid more. It's just, I spend way more time with my mother than I do with my father. I'm very, very close to my mother. I love my father very much, but we don't do very much together.
Mm.
So does that mean my mother loves me more than my siblings? No. But I could see where, like, if Sybilla spent a lot of time with Lyman, like, their father's dead. And so Richard's remaining parent has perhaps given his brother a lot more attention. But that doesn't mean she loves him more.
It doesn't mean that Richard is right.
Yeah, it doesn't mean that Richard is right. Exactly. So Richard thinks his mother loves Lyman more. That doesn't mean she actually does.
Yeah. I made my little notes on paper, so we got through artist vivisection note.
It was a good line.
So now we reconnect with Lymond, who is across the river of Wark, where he was supposed to meet Samuel Harvey the day before.
Anyway.
By the way, I love this little bit. I Googled this. Here we go. This is the walk from Threave to Wark.
Holy crap!
Our walk. There are some rivers in there. He said he was on foot most of the way. There was some swimming. He must have stolen a horse at some point because you can't walk for 30 minutes.
Yeah, because this is the next day.
Yeah.
That's a 32-hour walk at the shortest, so.
But this
no way. Wow.
And he's injured.
Yes. Oh, and actually, while we're looking at shiny things,
Shiny.
there's Wark.
Okay.
Cool. So, Gideon sort of brings him across the river, and they talk. He did miss Samuel Harvey, but he says that he'll be back in a couple of weeks, or I think it's at this point just next week. And then they start talking politics, and then...
Wait, you skipped the part where Gideon puts him to bed first.
Yeah.
Well, that's even later, I think.
No, that's the beginning.
Oh, that's at the beginning? Okay.
Because, like, Lyman comes in, and he's backlit, so Gideon can't see him. He doesn't realize how messed up he is. And he thinks he's drunk. He thinks he like just was late for his appointment and got drunk. And Gideon is disgusted to his soul. And then Lyman comes into the light and he sees him and he sees how sick he is. And he's like, "Oh, I'm sorry." And he goes to bed.
Right.
And that's why we love Gideon.
Damnably sober, Mr. Somerville.
Yep. Gideon at his most practical.
Yeah.
So this is the line that I wanted to point out. This is the next day, right before they start talking about politics. Lyman starts talking about everything he usually does, and Gideon interrupts him and says, "I wish to God," said Gideon with mild exasperation, "that you'd talk just once in prose like other people." Which I think is exactly what almost everybody reading this book feels at some point or another.
Just be blunt.
This was my second quote. I wish to God.
Oh, yay! I picked one of them.
Yeah. Yeah. And then I love that he quotes with malice and I didn't look up what it was, but obviously it's some sort of like code or motto or like the preamble to some treaty between the English and the Scottish or something? What is it?
It's Roger Ascham, who was later a Latin tutor to Queen Elizabeth. And he may actually have been at this time before she was queen. And he was a noted Protestant. This is a treatise about some random thing. I forgot what it's about, but it's somehow there's a segment in it about this relationship between England and Scotland. Also, I love that right after he quotes this, because Ascham is a noted Protestant, Gideon asks him if he's a Protestant, and Lyman basically says, I echo like a mina. Basically, like, he quotes all kinds of things. It doesn't mean he believes in like whatever's behind them.
Yeah, but I love that they start out this kind of big discussion of politics with this quote, because it's so opposite of what is happening. Like the as for the Scottish men and the Englishmen, be not enemies by nature, but by custom, not by our goodwill, but by their own folly, which should take more honor in being coupled to England than we should take profit in being joined to Scotland. One God, one faith, one compass of the sea, one land and country, one tongue in speaking, one manner in trade in language, like courage and stomach in war, like quickness of wit to learning, hath made England and Scotland both one. And it's like, that is definitely not what's going on. And yeah.
I mean, I love this because, I mean, we get to see this completely different side of Lymond. No more quotes from here on out. Super practical, astute, incisive observation and perspective on what the political situation is, what the best options would be. He's not dogmatic. He doesn't say he has the answer, but then when he's going to push, he has actually really good, sane, logical answer that would solve a lot of problems that, of course, no one's going to do.
Well, I mean, at the bottom of 363, where he says, like, France has too many commitments to spare enough troops to rule Scotland. Good Lord, if England can't do it, then France isn't likely to. That leaves England under a regent in the Queen's absence, and if I were the Scottish government, the Queen would become absent damn quickly from now on. Like, that's just what's going to happen. Like, and the why. It's the what will happen in like a month and a half, and why it's going to happen, which.
Notice he's not completely anti-England, but he's saying he's basically saying, like, you didn't see what the English did to us, that 30 years ago this was one of the greatest nations in Europe, and you know, Henry VIII came here and burned things and crushed people, and that breeds hate, and you know, you can't like not account for the fact that England has been murdering our people. Like, we might
have had your chance, and
we might be great allies, but like you're murdering us, so no.
It.
Yeah.
And the French aren't going to make the effort, you know. So
they're dangerous to us. We can have more independence because there's a ocean between us.
Right.
And I love also throughout it they use chess metaphors, because this book is called The Game of Kings, and every chapter is a heading about chess, so this like gets into the guts of the politics, and he sees it like a chess player. He sees all of these potential moves. He sees these negotiations. He's incisive enough and informed enough to know what's like a ploy that's not really gonna like manifest versus what's really likely to happen, you know?
Right. And I think the key here in this game is maybe, I mean, I don't know, I don't play chess like Lyman, but maybe the key is, if the Queen goes to France, then who is regent of Scotland while the Queen is in France? And if Lyman can manipulate this chess game in such a way that the person who ends up being regent of Scotland is good for Scotland, then he will have won the game. Like, so. And I did not Google who that person is. So
I also love the way, like, I love a couple of things about this. One is it makes you realize that the things we think of as history are just like now, nobody at the time knew what was going to happen. And there's all these other potential things that could have happened. And I love this like feeling of being, because I mean, this writer did such research. She knew these things inside out. She's super incisive. Like if you go look this stuff up and read about it, she's right. Like this is a whole bunch of plausible things and a whole bunch of really accurate analyses of what was happening. And it just kind of puts you back in time as like, wow, like the whole history of Europe could have been different. At any of these moves that have been different would have set off cascading impacts, and the world we live in would be a different world. Okay, and then I also just love how this turns out, where then, Gideon is looking at him, and Gideon, who we talked about, he's so observant, has completely reassessed his perspective on Lyman, and he's like, why aren't you in Edinburgh with your people?
That would come down to Mr. Harvey.
But then also, I love
Margaret Lennox as well.
Yeah, Lyman says, they threw me out. He says it calmly, but you can feel the tragedy of that. And he says, youth, women, and bad company. Nothing sentimental about that either, or rather, not women, one woman. And Gideon guesses.
Mm-hmm.
It's so smart.
Yeah. They kicked him out.
Yes.
And they're missing out on this person who, could help the country so much. And he knows it. Yeah. It hurts him because he wants to help.
Yeah.
So he does want to see Lyman have his meeting with Samuel Harvey. So he says, yes, Gideon wants to see Lyman and Samuel Harvey meet. So instead of saying you can't stay here, so you'll come back to Flaw Valley with me. I'm going to go to Berkowitz or something like that to talk to Gray, and you can stay with Kate, my wife, during this time.
So what do you guys make of Lyman's reactions to that? It's at the bottom of 365 and it goes into 366, because I find them super telling about his character and about what he's been through.
I love that he didn't manipulate Gideon, and Gideon is helping him anyway. Mm-hmm. And I love that he's confused by that. It's like he doesn't understand why. It's just because Gideon's a good guy. It's like, that's not something Lyman encounters very often, I think. Like, just
but he thinks what Gideon's about to say is that I'm just going to take you to prison anyway. You're going to get caught, so I'm going to take you to prison anyway. Like he immediately jumps to the conclusion that he doesn't betrayed again, because he's always betrayed. People are always hurting him. It's like beyond him that someone would just help him out of the goodness of their heart.
Yeah, it's super confusing. Like this guy is just going to be like, okay, I believe you, and I will help you, and. Yeah. And even there's also a line like Gideon doesn't quite know why he's doing it either, but it's just because he's a really good guy.
Gideon's very intuitive.
Gideon's a good guy. I definitely did not expect him to sort of take this place, but
yeah, I didn't either. I was not expecting him to be as key a character as he was. Although the whole bit with his wife was kind of a clue, like they were clearly a set of characters that we're going to see again. So.
All right. So next part of this chapter, because it is still going, it is a long chapter. We go back to Mid-Culture, where Sybilla finally gets news of Lyman's escape brought to her by none other than Will Scott. So Will Scott is there, and also Agnes Harries is there, and they talk about a raid. Lord Grey has attacked Dalkeith and taken most of the Douglases prisoner, except for George Douglas himself. While this happens, they dismiss Agnes Harries from the room and then sort of start talking about Lymond and what's going on with that.
And then I love the way Sybilla tells him that Christian has been captured, and she's just like, the word is pleasantly, but it's obvious that it's not pleasant. Like she's.
Well, this is a very Lyman thing. He gets this from his mother. She says something pleasantly that's awful, and that she must be feeling awful about.
Yeah.
In a way, it makes you feel worse because she seems so unaffected. Yeah. Right before that also is, I just love the line where she's talking sense into Will. And he says, "Are you sorry I captured him?" And she says, "Sorry, yes, aren't you?"
Yeah. Yeah.
And he is. He's like vacillating at this point, up and down. Who knows whose side he's going to be on tomorrow.
Yeah. Yeah. And then we get Kate.
We're back at Flaw Valleys, where Gideon Somerville has brought Lymond, and he's going to put him in the room at the end of the hall. And I just love how Kate reacts to this.
No silk sheets, no goose feather mattress, and 2 stairs and a nasty muddy yard to cross before he can even round up the livestock, unless he starts with the mice.
Right? It's like, why don't we put out the red carpet for this guy who stole all our animals? Like, what is wrong with you, husband of mine?
But you know, she puts up with it.
Yeah.
I love this part too. Have you told Philippa? Gideon nodded. I told her he was here to be punished. Oh, in that case, she's probably in the room at the end of the passage with the chabuk. Or is it locked? I don't know what that is, but I imagine like they're showing sort of how her character, how, not pig-headed, that's the wrong word, but like that she's going to be there like trying to do the punishment herself.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Philippa doesn't let things go easily.
Nope. Yeah, and I love this. The don't you think you should retire again? The first retiral seems to have gotten us laid. No, well, I shall have to look after your nasty friend. Don't blame me if he isn't quite the same person when you get back.
Yes.
But then she goes to the room, and what happens, Philippe?
And she discovers that he is very injured and very ill, probably because he just walked 32 hours in one day's time.
And he's back and still bleeding.
Yes, he's still bleeding from his shoulder. So she
across some rivers with an open wound.
She realized that he's going to have to convalesce here, and that sort of changes her attitude a little bit. She realizes, oh, this is probably why Gideon actually brought him here, not just to be a prisoner. So she does her part to help with that.
Except he locks her out of the room.
Locks her and the servant out, which is very amusing to me.
Yeah.
Anxiety.
I know. She's like, let me in. He's like, no.
So what does that tell you about Lyman? He is not going to be nursed.
No.
No, he's not going to let people see him when he's weak.
No, and he's told people before he can do it himself. Like, I'll take care of that.
I think it goes right back to before. He expects everyone to hurt him. He has to protect himself. He has all these walls up. And this is another
too vulnerable.
Yeah.
All right. We're almost there, just a little bit more. So now we jump to Lord Grey. And Lord Grey and Gideon Somerville meet and discuss a lot of things, including the prisoners that Grey took, all of the Douglases. He did manage to send George Douglas's wife back to him. But then while they're talking about the prisoners, he talks about a red-headed blind girl. And we do find, in fact, that Christian Stewart has been captured on the raid of Dalkeith. And she is one of the prisoners.
We are at, by the way, Barrack, which here is Barrack Castle.
Mm.
Okay.
Well, and they're talking about how Christian Stewart is sort of asking about Samuel Harvey. And of course, Gideon is kind of perceptive. And he's like, I wonder if she knows Lymond, Sir Francis, because he's been asking about Samuel Harvey as well.
They have a wonderful little, like, subtextual conversation. They're both
right in front of Grey.
People. Yeah, right in front of Grey.
Yeah.
Yeah, in the next section, they talk about it openly. It's like, do you know him? Oh, yes, I do know him. So that's great. But I think Grey already knows that Christian is connected to Lymond, because he mentions that later in his talk with Margaret.
I don't know if he knows. Maybe he does, or maybe he finds afterward, because he intercepts a letter that she had written.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So it's after that first bit.
I don't remember.
Yeah.
It is interesting that Gray suggests, oh, I'm going to need a chaperone for Christian Stewart while she's here. I know who I can pick. Why not Margaret Douglas?
But I love that he's thinking, like, get her out of her hair. Gosh, she's so annoying. But then I love that Gideon is so perceptive. He's like, that's not a good idea.
No, please don't put the two of them together. But it happens anyway.
But he at least manages to warn her, so she goes in knowing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Margaret, in her meeting with Gray, really, she wants Samuel Harvey back in London as soon as possible. She sort of castigates him for sending him in the first place. She's like, this is the man that you chose out of all of the generals that you could have picked. They talk about Christian Stewart and her interest in Samuel Harvey. Margaret is rather conniving and finds out that Christian Stewart has Samuel Harvey's address. And that's what she was planning, excuse me, to give to Lyman the next time she sees him.
Well, that's what she says.
What?
That's what she says.
Well, right, that's what she says.
Margaret is very skeptical that that's all it is.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And then there's the bit at the end where we find out that Samuel Harvey has been injured and is on death's door. Excuse me, I don't know why. There's a frog in my throat.
No worries.
Been talking too much.
Drink of water.
I have been.
I guess I just observations that stand out to me in this is Margaret's astonishment about Christian and the fact that she's astonished by her being blind, and she's so like immediately interested. Who's this person that Lyman is involved with?
Mm-hmm.
And then the devious way that she talks to Christian, where she goes in like, "We have a mutual friend. Maybe you could help him if you were free. Like, is he okay?" And trying to like pretend like the real exchange Christian had with Gideon about this is our mutual friend, we're gonna help. Margaret tries to do the same thing in this devious, sly way. And like thankfully Gideon has warned Christian and she knows that this is a manipulation. And I love like it's very human that we get this view of Christian at the end after this awful experience with Margaret trying to manipulate her, where she puts on a good face and she pretends like, you know, plays innocent, plays dumb. And at the end, after she had gone, Christian sat alone for a long time in her own black world, conquering a rage which would have alarmed her visitor. She is furious.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I mean, because not only was she manipulating Christian to be like, you know, he's a mutual friend, we want to help him, but she was also bribing her with freedom. Like, if you were free, you could help him. And yeah.
Not a nice piece of work, Margaret Lynn.
Nice.
I initially liked her. I no longer do.
But this is an interesting thing, though. She's introduced in a way where you're not given any clues about what your opinion of her should be. Mm-hmm. And so you go in like Will, watching this scene between this woman who is grand and beautiful and vulnerable and scared, and you don't know yet, like, what she's like, so you kind of fall like Will for her, you know, her innocence and her fear, and you're totally willing to be open-minded about her and think maybe this is a great love interest, maybe this is actually a victim of Lyman's. Like, you really don't know, and so you at this point are kind of carried along with the narrative of starting to see what she really is and why Lyman reacted to her the way that she did. But I think also if you're a less incisive reader, you guys have really impressed me. You're picking up on so much. But you very likely have come out of that scene with Will and that Will was watching the two of them thinking that Lyman is terrible. He was so mean to her. And slowly at this point you're realizing actually Lyman probably had a good reason. She's really creepy.
Yeah. And they clearly have a long history where she's what is her age in relation to Lyman's age? Do we know that?
What do you think it is? We don't know.
She's older than him.
Just a little bit.
So my feeling, and I could be completely wrong, I don't know why I feel like this, but I feel like she took advantage of him at some point in their past. And it became publicly known, and that's why he got kicked out of Edinburgh or something. But that somehow it was her, like that he was manipulated and perhaps acted foolishly and is being like, has had this like enormous punishment that is completely outsized to whatever crime happened, but that she was at the center of that. I don't know why I think that.
Yeah, I'm super curious what you picked up on that led you to see it that way.
It just feels like they have a romantic past. Like, she's hugely manipulative. So is he, but it feels like this is long in the past. So if his pain and manipulation, like his mother just said about he's known the knife for 5 years. So if his like motivation in that is somewhat recent and their past is before that, I'm just wondering if she's older than him. Like if he was this young, bright guy that she, because she's what, on husband 3 or something? Like she's
gone through a bunch of them and
she's gone through a bunch of husbands, and so she clearly knows how to manipulate the power structure and gender roles and come out on top of what she wants. And so also it's kind of a trope, like you know, the cougar lady kind of chasing the young guy and her being kind of,
but she's relatively young herself. How old would Lyman?
That's why I was asking. Like, I don't know. It works. That idea works better if she's older than Lyman, but I don't know their relative ages.
Philippe, did you have a take on this?
Not really.
It could also work if she's significantly more powerful than him, though. Like, even if they're the same age, but she has more political and social power.
We know already she's definitely got more power, for sure.
Yeah.
She's almost royalty.
Yeah, so it kind of works the same if they were in some sort of situation and she just has a lot more power. But
I definitely think she has something to do with the fact that he's been exiled and that, you know, people think he's a traitor. I think there's something in the backstory definitely involving her. So
yeah.
But I just don't think we know enough about his past yet to make any of those discoveries.
Mm-hmm.
But you guys are there have been lots of clues laid along the way, so
yeah.
We're getting
and there are lots of clues hidden in this book that some of us have not picked up on, including me.
Oh, me too. If I read it again, I'm sure I would pick up on so much more.
I pick up more every single time I read it, and I think I've read this one like 20 times or something. But there's always, and you look up a quote and you're like, oh my god, that's a clue. Like if I looked that up, I'd know this. Whatever.
Yeah.
And like we didn't even talk about this, but like narrative wise and plot wise, there's all these little clues. Like we skipped over this completely, but like Patty Little, the goldsmith guy, he was the one who was helping pass the letters. That was in the
Yeah.
We didn't even talk about it. Like there's so much stuff like
that. So if we go back to Gideon, so we end the chapter in Gideon's perspective. I love this little bit where he says, if the Countess could play a waiting game, then so could he, thought Gideon, and caught himself with a surprised grimace. One would think it was his affair. Like, he's gotten so wrapped up in this story that he's like, all right, I can beat the Countess. You know, and he's like, wait a second, this isn't my thing.
He's helping a Scottish outlaw, even though he's English.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. So.
All right. And we end. What do we end with? Gideon's heading back to Flaw Valleys.
Yes.
Yeah. And we find out that Harvey is on death's doorstep.
Apparently.
How and why did your opinion, if it did, of Lymond change throughout this chapter?
It didn't. My opinion of him didn't really change.
Yeah, I've been thinking he's been a good guy for a while now. So I like that even after Will betrayed him and accidentally led to the death of Turkey Matt, that he still sort of did that about face and was like, oh my God, I still need your help with this stuff. Let's work on this together and go help Christian Shepherd. Stewart. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, I think we see a little bit more of his like softness and vulnerability, and I mean, just through the exhaustion and the wounds, and like him coming to Gideon and kind of almost having given up at that point. Like I think we see more of that, but I don't think that's necessarily different from what I thought of him before. I think it's just a layer that is peeled away that you get to see a little more.
I think the things that were maybe just like hammered home a little more in this chapter were the way that Lyman cares so much about his men. Like the reason he's so angry at Will is that Will got Turkey killed. But even in previous chapters, when Will put the men at risk, that's where Lyman was the most upset.
Yeah.
But then also when he realizes that Will has been protecting the men, and that's why he's in the cellar, the way that he's so forgiving toward Will after that, and he's like, he's so like proud in a way. I hadn't realized until that point that he's really keeping it under the radar how much he really sees Will as this protege that he's trying to develop.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I think also his vulnerability, like you know intellectually, well, all humans are vulnerable, but this is where you really start to see it.
Yeah.
I live in Brooklyn.
Like, what is that?
All right, well, I didn't have any like other kind of questions because we kind of talked through all the ones I wrote down in the chapter. Did you guys have other stuff that you wanted to talk about in this chapter?
Not in this chapter, but I do want to discuss something.
I mean, the French fleet is off the coast.
Yes, the French fleet is off the coast.
That's
good
wonder what they're up to.
I mean, I love that they just kind of threw that in, like, as an aside, like, by the way, the French are here, and the English fleet's down south, and nobody seems all that concerned. Like, I think it was Margaret and Gray that were having that discussion, if I remember correctly. Like, neither of them seems too worried about the fact that there's a French fleet off the coast, and I'm like, that seems a little worrisome. Anyway, so I feel like that's a little bit of a, not necessarily a sort of Damocles hanging over the story, but it's definitely, I don't know, Chekhov's gun on the wall. Like, you can't have the French show up without them going off somehow.
Well, and I think if you're Scottish, it probably stands out more. Or if, like Dee, you Googled history that Mary Queen of Scots is about to go to France, he's like, what is the French fleet around for, and what's going to happen with France?
The French and the English have hated each other for, well, that's not exactly true. Like, William the Conqueror came over in the early, 1066. So then the English royalty were basically French for a while. So I guess they didn't hate each other then. But it's been a while. I just think for the English, like, having the French off the coast of Scotland's not a good thing.
Become a problem.
Yeah.
Yes, no, that is a good catch. What else? What else do you think is going to happen next, or what are your predictions, or what do you want to happen next?
Well, I hope Harvey doesn't die.
Yeah, I really want Lyman to get.
That would be disappointing.
Clearly, Gideon's not the person that betrayed Lyman in the past, and we have sort of ruled out Crouch as well. So, if it is any of the three of them, it's going to be Harvey.
I mean, I hope he's able to have a conversation with Harvey. And Lyman isn't even, he's said multiple times that he's not even sure that Harvey has anything to contribute, like that he's not completely sure that Harvey can even help him. So I hope that he has a conversation with Harvey, and that Harvey does have some information that will help him, and that he will be able to prove, like, I think if we end this book, obviously it's part of a series, so we could end the book on a huge cliffhanger of disaster, like that could happen. But if we end this book having resolved nothing but the fact that people know he didn't kill his sister, I will be happy. Like,
yeah,
I would like that one thing to happen, that becomes public knowledge that he was not responsible for that.
Anything else? Philippe, anything you want to happen?
I mean, I want to see Marietta and Richard get back together.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
What do you want to happen to Lyman, aside from having his name cleared?
I mean, I think he and Richard need to have a talk. Like,
Yeah, I'll be very surprised if there's some sort of confrontation between the two.
Yeah, there's got to be
before the end of this book. There really has to be. It's been set up.
And I really hope they actually talk and don't just like pummel each other or, you know, whatever, come at each other with swords or something.
There may be a little bit of swordplay at first.
I'm sure there will. But a conversation would be lovely. I wonder if Sybilla could just lock both of them up in the cell, like in the cellar.
But would they both come out of that cell?
That's true. That's true. Maybe not.
Okay, guys. Anything else? Oh, you had a theory.
I do have.
Yeah. What's your theory?
I have a big theory. After we talked last week, Dee, after you left, Laura and I had a little bit longer discussion. And
I actually watched it.
Okay. Yeah. So I had this theory that Andy Hunter was working with Lymond.
Which I do not think is true at all.
I don't think that's true at all anymore. But there is clearly something up with Andy Hunter. Laura challenged me to go back and follow the brooch. So I did. And as I was following the brooch, sort of this whole alternate thing of what may be happening came up in my head. So I'm going to go through it here. I went back and I reread all the parts with Andy Hunter, and I followed the brooch. And so this is what I came up with. And I don't want to look at Laura too much during this because I don't want to like realize that I'm on the right path or the wrong path. So Dee, I'm basically going to try and convince you of what I think might be going on.
Try and convince me. We'll see.
So, page 127.
Okay.
Dandy gives Catherine the brooch. It's the first time we see the brooch that I know of.
That's the first time we meet him, right?
No, we've met him a couple times. He's already talked to Marietta a little bit about.
Oh, okay. Well, we meet his mother, and she's horrible and
horrible. She says it's tacky.
He gives her this incredibly tacky brooch.
Yes, I don't think it is tacky.
By the way, brooch.
Brooch. Sorry, I just think that that was her way of reacting to it. I feel if Dandy's older brother had still been alive and given her the same brooch, she would have loved it. So that's what happens on page 127. On page 133, Sybilla is in Patty Liddell's goldsmith shop, and she overhears down below, Dandy is there, and he's getting something altered at Patty's. And it specifically says at that time that it is a brooch. So I'm just assuming that in all these cases, it's the same brooch. It might not be. The next time we see it, we jump to page 190, where Marietta receives a diamond brooch from the jewelry that's being sent to her. So at some point, there's this mysterious thing that happens where the brooch goes from Dandy's ownership to Lyman's. So this is why
it's been hanging out at Patty's shop, right? So maybe Lyman got it from him.
It's possible. I also thought that maybe Lyman stole it from Dandy Hunter, but that's impossible because that happened before Dandy brought the brooch to Patty Liddell's shop.
Yeah.
Right.
So the next time we see the brooch, Marietta has it. It's the only piece of jewelry she has left. When she was being held captive at Arran, they took all the jewelry except for that. And I'm assuming that after her argument with Lyman, she leaves the brooch there. And then the final time we see the brooch so far on page 297, he gives the brooch to, sorry, no, this is page 302. He gives the brooch to Agnes Harries. So I'm just assuming that it's the same brooch this whole time. So where I don't know what happens to the brooch is between the point where Andy Hunter has it altered and then the point where suddenly Lyman has it. And this is why I thought they were working together. So I went back trying to reread and figure out if there were any clues to what happened to this brooch in between there. And there really isn't anything. Then a light bulb came up in my head. And we're just assuming that Andy Hunter or that Lyman somehow got the brooch from Andy Hunter. But here's another.
I'm not assuming that.
No. What if Lyman has not been the one sending Marietta the jewelry at all? What if it's been Andy Hunter the whole time? And he's doing it to try and drive Marietta and Richard apart and blame it on Lymond. That's a possibility.
Do we ever hear Lyman talk about the correspondence with Marietta? Do we ever hear about that from his perspective?
He actually admits to doing it in their fight. He says something about, yes, it was me sending you the jewels. But this is at the point where he's trying to sort of make himself out to be the bad guy. And I think he's doing it to drive her back to Richard. Because at this point, I'm assuming that maybe Andy is the one that's been sending Marietta the jewels. But why? Why would he be doing that? Well, there's several times when I've read back where I find out that Andrew Hunter is sort of, he's trying to impress his mother. He spends a period of time sort of questioning Agnes Harries about her dowry and like all the land she holds. And he gets really serious about that. Mm-hmm. So there's a possibility that he's trying to drive Marietta and Richard apart so he can steal Marietta from him and get the dowry and sort of impress his mother. And then when I was thinking about this, I also talked about how I thought that Dandy Hunter and Lyman were working together because maybe Dandy Hunter was the one that shot Richard at the end. Well, if they're not working together, it's possible that Dandy still was the one that shot Richard because he's trying to kill him. Because if Richard was dead, then he could possibly swoop in and claim Marietta for himself.
Okay, so some of this I think could be plausible. There's a big problem with the money though. And I don't know Scottish law, so I don't know the power that women have over their money after they get married. But in American law, in the 1600s and 1700s, once you marry, a woman loses her money. Like the dowry no longer belongs to her. So it would be, Richard would keep it. Like if anything happened to Richard and Marietta's marriage, as far as the marital law that I know from pre-19th century, Marietta has no control over that money. So okay. if Dandy Hunter lures her away from Richard, then he gets nothing except for her, and that would be a huge scandal. Mm-hmm. But if he gets her sympathetic to him and then Richard dies, then he could marry her as a widow, which would do this. So
it might not have anything to do with the dowry. It might just be that he is in love with Marietta.
Maybe. I mean, and maybe he has some plan, like if this is plausible. I'm not buying it 100%, but I think it's interesting. Is there some way that Richard has, had some sort of military accident, or is Danny Hunter like gonna, a la King David and Uriah, is he gonna throw Richard in front of a bunch of soldiers so that he can have Marietta like Bathsheba? I mean, talking about tropes.
Well, there is also another incident. This, if Dandy Hunter did shoot Richard with the arrow at Wappenshaw, it may not actually be the first time he tried to kill Richard. Because if you recall, when Richard and Agnes almost drowned in the river, Andy Hunter was there also. And he was the one that crossed the river first and said, oh, it's perfectly safe to do so here. And then he sort of ran away and only came back after Richard had swum out of the river.
Right, he'd gotten out of the river, yeah.
So that could have been another point where he was trying to possibly kill him.
And he and Marietta definitely have some sort of relationship that I think is super fishy, because she shouldn't be talking to him the way that she is.
Absolutely.
It's weird.
There's also, I think Dandy has something against Lyman personally as well, because when they're talking, when Dandy and Marietta are talking about the jewels that are being sent, and he's telling Marietta, you've got to tell Richard about these things. And Marietta's like, oh, but Lyman, he's this and he's that. On page 215, he gets really angry about it. And let me turn to that page.
Why does Marietta think Lyman's sending her the jewels? I can't remember.
Because the packages and the notes that came with it have all sorts of flowery language. She's already a bit infatuated with Lymond after how he swooped in and set the castle on fire.
So she's just assuming.
Yes, she's assuming. She sees him as this dashing figure. And when she talks to Dandy about it, Dandy agrees. Oh, it's got to be Lymond. So when she says on 215, he isn't unattractive, Dandy. If he hadn't been forced into outlawry by a single mistake all those years ago. A single mistake? Do you know how many died and how many were taken prisoner at the Battle of Solway Moss? Exclaimed Hunter with sudden savagery. Do you know how many years he had been spying for England before that? Then when the secret leaked out that they got him safely to London and Calais to save him from hanging, that when the French caught him and he was freed by Lennox, he served Wharton and Lennox for years until they found he was cheating them too. And then he had to turn mercenary abroad. So like he does not like Lyman at all. He's got some sort of vendetta against him. And I'm wondering if it's possible that he blames Lyman for what happened to his brother. Because we know that Dandy Hunter's older brother is dead, but we don't know why or how.
Right.
So that's what I came up with when I went down the rabbit hole of following the brooch. It's a possibility. I don't know if it's real or not. I mean, if it's not real, I just spent this whole time talking about it and I'll look rather foolish, but
I think you followed interesting clues.
Yeah.
And I think that is a totally reasonable guess.
Yeah.
At least so far from what I remember. So if
because
you're correct, I will not be surprised.
Dorothy Dunnett has done this excellent job of convincing the reader that Lyman is this master manipulator. So we automatically assume that any kind of thing that happens that's mentioned about Lyman, that he's behind it, that he's working things in his favor, that he's planting all these little hints and dropping all these clues. But if in fact Lyman is not the one behind the jewelry at all, and
maybe he's just more of a like, oh, this is going to work in my favor. I'll go down that road.
Right. And he's not trying to break Richard and Marietta up. In fact, he's trying to get them back together. That there's no real
I think that's weird because I don't think he's trying to break them up.
No.
He's like an odd way to.
I think he's trying to get them back together. I think that's why he was so mean to Marietta.
Right.
So that makes me look at him in this completely new light because I couldn't understand what his thing with Richard really was all about. I figured it was just something we didn't know about. Mm-hmm. But if it's not him and if it's Dandy Hunter manipulating things on his side, then I don't know.
So if that's what's happening,
mm-hmm.
do you think Lyman now knows it's Dandy?
I do. Mm-hmm. Because he asks Dandy Hunter specifically when he captures him, how's Marietta? Mm-hmm. Like, that's one of the first things he says to him. So I don't know when exactly he figured it out, but if that is what's happening, I don't know. I'm going to keep going with it as we read the next chapter and believe that that's what's true to see if there's any more clues.
I think that is very...
Because there was really, except for the first bit of this chapter, we didn't really talk about Dandy Hunter at all. So, but that's what I'm going to do. Keep going forward.
That's interesting.
I didn't really think there was going to be a big mystery in this book, but when Laura sort of challenged me to follow the clues, like, that's what I do. And like a movie, if you like give me a movie and say, oh, there's a twist to it, you'll never see it coming. I'm like, you shouldn't have told me that because I'm going to spend the whole movie trying to pay attention to what the twist is and I will figure it out.
Mm-hmm. This is the who's never not gotten out of an escape room.
Yeah, well.
Never lost an escape room.
I do get out of escape rooms, but I'm always with the group. It's never just me, so.
You're the key figure.
So I don't know. I'm interested to see if my theory bears fruit, or if after I read the chapter next week, I'll have to completely rethink it because something happens that completely destroys it all. So
to be completely honest, if you're wrong, I'm going to be disappointed because I like this. Like this is neat.
And it's clever because
it's super clever.
It's historical fiction. I don't think if this is what's happening, anybody went into this thinking there's this whole subplot mystery that's going on.
I like it.
Yeah, I do too.
I like it a lot.
And I didn't quite like this book in the beginning, but I've grown to appreciate Dorothy Dunnett. And if this is true, then I appreciate her a whole lot more. And if this is true, what else has been happening behind the scenes that we don't know about yet? So
Yeah.
That's all I got.
Well, I'm gonna keep my mouth shut and my face straight, and we're gonna find out more soon.
Yeah. I didn't really look at you much, Laura, but you, from when I did glance over in your direction, you didn't give anything away.
You were very calm.
Doing my best over here. All right. On that note, we will have another chapter very soon.
Yes.
All right. Bye. As long as the brooch is the same brooch, which I think is a reasonable assumption to make. The only way for it to get from PD's shop to the package that went to Marietta is either Dandy gives it to Lymond, which we don't think happened.
Don't think that happened at all.
Sybilla stole it and gives it to Lymond.
No, because
I don't think that's happening.
Out of the shop with the brooch.
Lyman stole it. Like PD gave it to Lyman instead of Dandy, which I don't think happened because it would ruin his reputation and that would be bad. And Lyman clearly depends on PD in some ways, or he seems to be more of a moving figure in this than we were thinking.
Right, because they talked about him having the letters in this.
Yeah, so I don't think Lyman would do anything to jeopardize his standing because that would mess up one of his pawns. Or Dandy's the one who sent the package. Like, yeah. I can't think of another.
I mean, it makes logical sense. We just assumed that it was Lyman sending the jewelry, so.
Right.
Yeah. And here's another thing, since we're still recording, since we started recording.
Oh, wait, are we still recording?
Yeah, she
Laura started
recording because we're still talking. If I'm right, and Dandy is the one that shot Richard with the arrow, one thing that I can't figure out.
Why do you think that? Because I can't remember why you think that.
Because let's go back to the Wappenshaw. Dandy is in the box with Marietta and Agnes, right. And he's talking to them. And at one point he says, oh, there's this area with high grass where Lyman could be hiding because we know he's challenging his brother. Let me go check it out. And Marietta's like, no, you'll be fine. Just stay here and talk with us. Right. And like, he seems really impatient to get away. He's really disinterested with what the ladies are talking about until he starts talking to Agnes about her dowry and what her lands hold.
I remember that.
And then as soon as Richard takes the field to shoot, Marietta turns around and Dandy Hunter is gone.
Oh.
So it seems that he went to the place anyway to try and capture Lymond. But it says that after the second arrow flies and the bird is attached, it even talks about Dandy Hunter. I don't have the exact page, but it says like he's angry about something and the arrow is up in the air behind him. And then after that, the third arrow shoots. So.
Right, like one arrow was super, like it was super weird because like one arrow like released the bird, which was like a super awesome shot.
Right.
And then one arrow shoots the bird.
Right.
Kind of also a really good shot because the bird's in motion and is flying away. Kind of.
And then one arrow.
And then one arrow
misses the mark and hits Richard.
Right.
So if I'm right, what I don't know yet is if Dandy shot all three arrows or if he shot only the third one and Lyman shot the first two. Because Dandy does find a bow and arrow and the type of arrows that were shot, and he also finds the glove. And I don't think Dandy sent Richard on the wild goose hunt with a glove, because in that chapter when Richard goes and talks to the Waws about the glove, the Waw says that the man who bought the gloves had the sandy blonde colored hair. And
so what you think is that Lyman shoots the stand, releases the bird, shoots the bird, drops the bow and arrow and glove, runs away, and immediately after that, Dandy comes upon the bow and arrow and glove, or the quiver and arrow, shoots Richard, and then's like, oh, I found it.
Yeah, that's a possibility. Or the other possibility is Dandy did it all and also sent Richard on the wild goose hunt with the glove. But I don't think that's true because, like I said, the guy who made the glove said it was a guy with blonde hair and blue eyes and flowery, which sounds like Lymond. And we don't have a physical description of Andy Hunter. I searched back and forth for it, but it never once says he has blonde hair. So I think it's more likely that Dandy shot the first two, and Lyman shot the first two, and Dandy shot the third, trying to kill Richard.
Interesting.
And we'll see if anything else happens to Richard in the upcoming chapters. If somebody other than Lyman tries to kill him secretly, I'm gonna think it's Dandy. Handy Andy Dandy. We'll see.
Dandy.
I have two interesting things to share that I'm going to try to say without giving anything away one way or the other. I will share that we were in Christian's point of view when Lyman woke up, and yet even though we were in
the river,
when he had amnesia, even though we were in her point of view, the narrator left things out. It left out that she knew who he was, for example.
Right.
So you can't rely upon point of view.
Right.
I think is a really interesting narrative, like structural trick that Dorothy Dunnett uses, because you generally expect if you're in someone's point of view, you're going to know all the important things that they're thinking. Actually, that's all I can say without being spoilery. But maybe think about if we were ever in Dandy's point of view, and if we were, what can we extrapolate from that?
Great. I'm gonna have to go back and read all of the Dandy parts yet again.
You don't have to
do that. I'm not gonna do that.
No, I'm actually gonna. I think if I'm gonna go back and look at anything this time, maybe more of Marjorie Douglas, or I want to try and find out.
Wait, Margaret Lennox?
Margaret Douglas.
Margaret Lennox. Margaret Douglas.
Well, she is a Douglas.
She is.
Or I think it would also be interesting to go back and try and find out what Sybilla is up to and how much she knows about certain things, and how she has been helping. She's definitely been helping Lyman the whole time. But
we glossed something over in this chapter too. Who was it that told them to go to Threave? It's the very end of the previous chapter.
Oh, it was Sybilla, wasn't it? Yeah.
Yep. And what happened in Threave? It's Maxwell and Agnes.
We've seen Maxwell be on Lyman's side before, and we know that Agnes has met Lyman when the brooch got handed over. So.
And it was like, this is the man who's responsible for our marriage. We're so grateful to him, and Lyman gave her the brooch. So.
And there was that whole scene at their wedding where Lyman came in. Yeah.
So
as we discussed, it's fairly easy to discern that Agnes freed Lyman. So,
we guessed last week that there's a reason that we were setting up Agnes to be sort of devoted to Lyman in some way. I also love the way that somebody described Maxwell, maybe it was Sybilla or Christian, described Maxwell as, like, they were talking about Agnes and said something about how she thinks she chose, but she was chosen, but it was chosen for her. But then they described Maxwell as like a guy who's kind enough to let her have her delusions, kind of. Like, I can't remember how it was phrased exactly, but it was like she'll be with someone who's like not gonna hurt her emotionally, basically. And I was like, oh.
That was when Sybilla was talking to Marietta about her relationship with Richard, right?
Yeah.
Came in and said Lyman's been captured. So
if you go back and trace Sybilla, knowing that from the Lake of Menteith on, for sure, she knows that Lyman and Christian are talking to each other. You'll definitely find things.
Okay. Well, she does, because we glossed over this too. The riddle that Lyman told
was one that she made up.
Was one that Sybilla made up. So she was like,
and
it was Lyman.
Lyman would know that, obviously. So, like,
my favorite little Sybilla Easter egg is, I forget who it is, but two characters are talking that she doesn't want talking because it threatens Lyman, or someone's asking Christian something that Christian shouldn't answer, whatever it is, but Sybilla just comes in and steps on somebody's foot. Look for it.
Awesome.
Oh, Sybilla.
She's great.
Yeah.
Yep. All right. Well, this was our extra Easter egg. Also recording.